we can worship you and sing about what Christ has done for us and the way that Christ has taken our sin and our crimson stain and paid for it on the cross. God, we are so thankful for that, and we praise you for all that you've done for us. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, I first have to admit I was a little sad when I found out Kara wasn't going to be singing this week, because it's been a while since I saw her. But my heart has changed with that, because that was fantastic. Thank you, guys. Just intonation and songs and worship was. Thank you. That was good to start that way. But Kara gave a pretty good introduction, and I have to return the compliment that she picked up a guitar, and it took about 2 weeks until she was ready to just kind of lead worship on her own. It was like God had put that in there, and I just happened to be the guy standing there when she discovered it. So she's got a lot of talent, and I'll come back another week and hear her sing. But anyway, what else? I think that's kind of about it. She kept saying Jason Peterson in a funny way, because I don't think I've ever heard her call me that, because my name's actually, birth certificate Jason Peterson, but everyone calls me Fish in the youth pastor world. So that's probably all you need to know about me. So let's pray and get rolling. Good morning, Heavenly Father. Thanks for the summer, and thanks for the season where life is just so abundant, and we've got, there's no school, so we think we have all this extra time, but we cram so much into it, and there's just so many experiences being made over the summer, and just help us to make the most of those, to remember those, and reflect on those, and just thank you for everything you've given us the opportunity to do. And in this heat, we just ask you to watch over those that are weaker and older and younger that are affected by the heat, and just protect them, and thank you for the gift of air conditioning and lots of water. So thanks now for this morning, and just let the words of Hosea speak to us and touch our hearts. Amen. So one other thing you might need to know about me is that I think Kraft Dinner, macaroni and cheese, is my favorite meal. And we like to make fancy mac in my house, where we'll make macaroni and cheese, and then we'll get breadcrumbs and sprinkle breadcrumbs on top. And maybe sometimes mix some vegetables in or something else, or more cheese maybe. And Kraft came out and now sells that, as you can get a box of home style. So it has breadcrumbs and extra cheese in it. And they got a new spokesman for it too. And his name was Ted Williams. And you might have seen on page 5 of the newspaper a lot of stories about Ted Williams over the past couple of years. Because he used to be the sports announcer, and he had the magical golden voice. And it was amazing. You can look him up on YouTube, and he's got a really cool voice. And then he got mixed up in drugs and alcohol and lost his job and ended up a homeless man. And he was sitting on the side of the street one day with a sign saying, "I've got a golden voice, I'll talk to you for money." So this guy with the video camera came up and just said, "Hey, talk to me." And he recorded it, and this amazing voice came out, and he put it on YouTube, and everybody fell in love with this guy. And he got job offers and started working for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and things were going really well. But then because of all the excitement, he's like, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do, I'm nervous," fell back into the drugs and alcohol, lost a couple of the job offers, and fell right back where he was. Dr. Phil came along, was like, "Oh, you almost had it. You almost had your second chance. I want to give you another second chance." So Dr. Phil set him up with rehab again. And went through that for a couple of weeks, left again. Ended up going into another one, and left again. And it's just this cycle of this guy with this great voice, and he keeps falling back into drugs, and he keeps coming back out. But the last thing that I've heard about him, in May, he got, I think it was on the Today Show, he said he'd been clean for almost a year. And he had jobs again, and he had a house. And it's a great story because it's about second chances that just keep coming, and keep coming, and keep coming. And I don't know if he's on his 8th or his 9th chance now or whatever, but it's just, I know there are things that I wish I had second chances at, and he keeps getting them over and over again. And I think that's what the book of Hosea is really about, is that God always keeps giving you more and more second chances. So if you're doing the challenge, I think the whole church is reading through the whole Bible this week. The book of Hosea will be your reading for Friday and Saturday. And it's being a pretty good book. The premise is that this prophet Hosea marries a prostitute, and she goes and cheats on him. So maybe not the happiest premise of a book ever. I know I'm avoiding reading or watching The Hunger Games because I think that's kind of like a sad premise, like kids killing each other for food. And I hear lots of good things about it. Like it's well written, it's great, and just that premise, it's hard to get over. And in the same way, I'm sure that if you read Hosea and you get over that premise, you'll be rewarded for it. I promise it has a happy ending. So, but to understand it, let's look at where it falls in the greater story, in the big story of the Bible, the meta-narrative, if you will. It starts, he just lists the name of the people, of the kings that he was living under. Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. So, if you were here last week, you might recognize some of those names. Because Hosea was around the same time as Isaiah and Amos, and they all kind of, I'm not sure if they knew each other, but they were saying kind of similar things in a similar time period, around 750 BC to 720 BC. And to get to why he had to come along. Because remember, King Solomon, so we'll just do it like a timeline, like my sheet of paper. King Solomon was king, and when he ended his kingship and died, the kingdom split. So Israel split into the north and the south. The north kept the name Israel, and the south took the name Judah. And they had separate kings going along. And the north was always a little more rebellious, a little quicker to run to other gods, and just kind of screw things up. So Hosea is preaching to the northern kingdom. And he's saying, you guys, you're doing it all wrong. You're messing things up. You're running away. You don't even realize it. And because of that big kind of beige area to the right of the Assyrian Empire is going to come in and capture you. You're all going to end up as slaves. Which kind of builds into this depressing thought of how Hosea starts. Is because most prophets come along and they're like, there's a lot of if-then statements. They're like, quick, turn around, change the way you're doing things before something bad happens. But Hosea starts with, you've gone too far, you're going to be captured. And there's no if-then. It's like, this is a sure thing. So, and hold on, if you have to go to the bathroom like 10 minutes, make sure you come back. Because there is a turning point, and it doesn't stay this depressing. So, the kingdom of Assyria is going to come over and take out the northern kingdom, and they're all going to be slaves. So, Hosea starts his ministry. He's like, how I'm going to start telling people this. I'm going to get married to the prostitute. Interesting way to start your ministry, or at least start a marriage. I've been married for a little over 2,000 days now, about 6 years. And when we got married, Pastor Schulenberg actually did the ceremony. We got up there and we're standing face to face, and he goes through the vows, because you have to have vows to make it a legal marriage. And he's like, Jason, do you take Betsy to be your wife, to have and to hold, da-da-da-da-da, until death do you part? This is one of those things I wish I had a second chance at. Because for whatever reason, I thought there's like a child dedication or something where you say yes, and then they ask again, and then I got to say I do. But anyway, so he says all that to me, and I'm like, yes! So I never got to say I do. So I've always wanted to go back, because I feel like that's a quintessential phrase that you should get to say when you're married. So I missed on my chance to say I do. But I'd like to visualize Hosea and Gomer getting married. Gomer was the name of his wife. And the pastor would be like, Gomer, do you take Hosea to love and to have for till death do you part? And her response would have been like, not really. Not feeling it, no. And it's not, I think that'd be a hard way to start a marriage, if knowing that there isn't that commitment there. So that's what the first 3 chapters are about, is this marriage between Hosea and this unfaithful woman. So let's just kind of run through their marriage a little bit and look at it. It starts with, in chapter 1:2, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. So that's what I just talked about, kind of how it starts. Then as time progresses, you get to where the inevitable comes. She decides to run away. Gomer says, I will go after my lovers, who give me food and my water, my wool, my linen, my olive oil, and my drink. Now, ironically, Hosea gave her all those things too, and she was just looking for something new. There was nothing new out there to get. She had everything she needed, but she was still running away, just looking for something. I'm not sure if she knew what she was looking for. She just was running away. So Hosea, heartbroken, of course. The anguish of the one I love has run away. And he's like, I'm going to go try and find her. I've got to get her back. So, therefore, Hosea says, I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness. Speak tenderly to her. Because Hosea wants her back. This is his wife. I know, usually in today's world, you can see the news all over the place. If somebody cheats on somebody else, you can kind of expect there's going to be kind of a rocky marriage. A lot of times it'll end in divorce then. Not always. There's resources and a good metaphor for Christ if you can stay together. But it's usually not expected. But then to see this prophet, after he's been heartbroken and cheated on, he's still chasing after his wife. And he finds her. And she's really not that interested in coming back. So he ends up buying her. So somehow she's worked her way into being owned by another man somehow. And so Hosea goes, I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. I have no idea how much a lethek is, but it's something that's incredible that this thing that was already his wife, he had to pay for her to come home. And sometimes the Bible just preaches for itself without a sermon. And when you see that, you have to think of Romans 5:8. And somebody else that paid the price for somebody that didn't even necessarily want to come home. Romans 5:8. God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It was alluded to in that offering song, and then you're talking about, I was thinking of this verse, and it's just a great verse. Memorize it, love it, own it. It really speaks for itself. But we're still in Hosea today. And after chapter 3, and you get through this marriage, and it's been rocky, and she ran away, and she came back. Then we've got 11 more chapters, which expands the metaphor. And one commentator said that Hosea was the first, chronologically, he was the earliest person to ever use metaphor where a person took on the characteristics of God. So there's probably a lot to learn about this. So from how we saw Hosea react, we can learn about God. And two things we can learn about God through that is that he's a God of discipline and of unearned love, which aren't too far apart, as we'll find out. So, Hosea had actually touched on discipline when they had their 3 kids. I've skipped over their kids until now just to build a little more tension and get rid of all the depressing stuff in the beginning. So he ended up having 3 children. And the first one was named Jezreel, which doesn't mean a whole lot to people in the United States unless they really love 2 Kings. But Jezreel, if it was the 60s, we would say he was named Vietnam. Because kind of the history of Jezreel is that it was a city where the king Ahab ruled. And he was a horrible king. He had done so much bad stuff. He was probably the worst king ever in the history of Israel. And he had set up temples to other gods and provoked his country to forget about the real God. And everybody's like, how can it get any worse? So they stage a coup, and this guy named Jehu takes over. And his first order of business was to kill every one of Ahab's relatives. Oh, maybe not the best start. We were hopeful, but okay, maybe he's just cleaning house or something, I don't know. So he kills all of Ahab's relatives. Okay, there's a lot of kids here, so we'll just leave it at that. It was horrible and just as grotesque as Ahab had been. And that set the tone for his whole reign. So the city of Jezreel is where we had all this hope that we were going to turn back to God, and it ended up just turning into bloodshed, and nothing good came out of it. So it's the place where hope died and was replaced by bloodshed. So he must have loved going to kindergarten. Jezreel, are you here? Everybody seems like, oh, stinks to have your name. So, but then if his siblings were in class with him, they'd all kind of be the same way. Because his sister was named Lo Ruhamah, which specifically means not loved or not shown mercy. And I think today the name would be punished, So we've got Vietnam, punished, and then they have a third child, Lo Ami, which would mean not mine or disowned. So if you think that what names you give your kids kind of determine what they're going to be, these kids all have a complex. They all have they're going to need counselors someday. And that's the whole point of it, though, is that Hosea is like, I'm going to name my kids, because I'm living out a metaphor, I'm going to treat my kids as Israel's going to be treated. Israel is going to be a place with no more hope. It's going to be replaced by bloodshed and captivity, because there's not going to be any more love or mercy shown to God's chosen people. You think, what could they have done to deserve this? Do they deserve it? Well, how did it get so bad? But that's how the rest of Hosea plays out. We get those 3 verses of this horrible marriage, and then we get 9 chapters of a list of all the things they've done wrong. And it's a pretty extensive list. And a lot of things show up multiple times. I mean, some things like they steal, they murder, they cheat. They show up once. But then Hosea seems to be more focused on like matters of the heart, not necessarily pure actions, and matters of how they think and how they react to God. So the things that he lists off, most common. Israel has not acknowledged God. Israel has treated the word of the Lord as an alien substance, something that's not to be respected or revered. Israel does not seek God when they're in trouble. Now, usually you'd think, like, that's a good turning point to God. A lot of people, when tough times happen in life, that's when they get really excited for God, because they realize, I can't do this on my own. Like, something bigger is going on here. And, one of my favorite verses in Hosea is 4:12. The people are praying to wood. So, like, they take a tree and they carve it into the shape of something, a calf or I don't know what. And then they pray to this tree. And I think it's just kind of funny, because Hosea says, you're praying to a tree. You're going to get answered by a stick. It's the best you can hope for. So I just thought it was kind of a funny verse. Thanks for laughing. So, here's that. So there's all these things. And then finally, you're using blessings to sin. God gives them gold, he gives them trees, he gives them love, and they turn around, and these altars that they had built to sacrifice things for God or have marriages in front of, and they take that and they're like, this wasn't a church, but we're going to take it out of the church and we're going to go put it in front of the fish god Dagon, and we're going to start sacrificing to him instead on this altar built for God. So all these things designed to help them get closer to God, they're using to get farther away from. And it's just, they're twisting everything. Is it getting kind of depressing yet? Because this is still, Israel's just running farther and farther away. And if you memorize one verse out of Hosea, it would be 6:6. It's in the middle of all this big list, and God just kind of breaks down like, I want mercy, I don't want sacrifice. I want acknowledgement of me. God says I want acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. So much of Hosea and what he's going for, the main sin that they're committing is that they think they're doing life on their own. They think that they have earned everything they have, and that somehow, either by luck or by sweat, or just because they're awesome, whatever they have, they deserve and they earn. And God's like, no, you don't understand that I gave you those things. Back when Gomer was going other places looking for olive oil and linen, she didn't realize that Hosea had already given everything she needs to her. He had olive oil and linen and food and love, and she was still running somewhere else. And God has given Israel, and by metaphor, all of us, everything we need. He's given us these skills to live in the world, and yet we still chase after other things and think that it's our work that's getting us there. So like if we have our savings account, God gave us the ability to get that job, to get that account. It's not that God made us and walked away and we're like, oh, I've been working so hard, so hard, so hard. That's how I got it. Both those come into play, but Israel was the sin that they just didn't give God any credit for any of their skills, any of their gifts. It was completely a matter of their head and their heart. So that was Hosea's mantra. Not acknowledging God, and they thought they were making it all on their own. My favorite quote that I found reading this week about Hosea actually came a little commentary. If you like to check quotes and whatever, it's from Introduction to the Prophetic Books by Charles Bullock. Anyway, it says that Israel's deficiencies were tragic, but it was denying those deficiencies that proved fatal. Or denying those deficiencies was fatal. And everybody sins. Israel sinned, Gomer sinned, we sinned. Everybody's got those things that just doesn't go right, that we make bad choices. But if we deny that we do anything wrong, that's the chief complaint of Hosea. That's the main issue in our heart, saying that like we're not in need of God. We might be bad, but we're not as bad as somebody else, so we don't need God to clean us. We don't need God to come in and say, well, I know you live in a sinful world and you're sinful, but I died for you. You have to acknowledge, A, that God's there and that you need him, because he's what takes away those sins. So that's my new favorite quote. I'm going to use that, or some variation of that a lot of times in the near future. But so that's how Israel got to where they were. This is where it starts to turn around. This is where all the depressing stuff is more or less done. Because that's how Israel got down to be so low, and where God's like, something has to be done. I can't let you hurt yourself anymore. Because as we're learning about God's discipline and God allowing Israel to be taken captive, it's still loving. It wasn't, God didn't do this because he was angry at what they had done. He was doing this to protect Israel. Yesterday, my daughter learned how to crawl. And so this morning, we're going crazy in my house because all of a sudden she loved to sit. So we'd put her in the middle of the living room and she'd just sit there and chew on whatever was within arm's reach. And then yesterday, she learned she could move. And all of a sudden today, everything she's been looking at for the last 11 months, she's like, oh, I can get there now. So she flips over. It's kind of cute because she doesn't crawl like a normal, I'm not sure if there's a normal baby crawl, but she planks. So she's up on her hands and her toes. And it's all like a backwards crawl motion. Nothing is underneath her. It's always out somewhere, sprawled out. But she's electrical cords. I unplugged my phone and she grabbed the end of the charger. So I'm assuming there's some form of power in that. And she's going for her mouth with it. I'm like, no. So electrical cords, getting into the kitchen. All of a sudden we got to protect the Windex and whatever's under the sink. And she's just running for all these things. And out of love, of course, and protecting her, I'm like, no, you go over here. And set her back in the living room where I lock things up and unplug things and whatever, put the lamps away. And I think that's God's thought and why he's disciplining Israel. Is he's like, no, I can't I know if you go any farther, you're going to get really badly hurt. So I'm going to try and protect you. And I also was kind of thinking of it like a corn maze. I went to college in Iowa, and there's lots of corn mazes in the fall. And you go out there when the corn's standing, and you're running through the maze, and it's a lot of fun. And then they come through and harvest the corn. And all of a sudden, you're like, well, I can see where this path is going to lead, because there's nothing blocking your view. So you're just like, okay, dead end. Okay, there's the way out. And when you can see where you're going, you make better choices. And Israel somehow could not see where they were going. My daughter couldn't see the effects of what she's playing with electrical cords and chemicals. Okay, I never let her actually get to the chemicals, but she doesn't realize that those would be harmful. So God is stepping in and be like, I see how damaging this is going to be. I have to stop you. I can't let you go any farther. And it was acting out of love. And this, I think, is a cool picture of a merry-go-round, taking over like time-lapse photography. So I was thinking about Ted Williams, the guy that does the announcement for Kraft's dinner now. And he had been on this merry-go-round. He had gotten onto the drugs and gotten off and gotten on, and he was just spinning around. And every time he got off the merry-go-round and drugs and back into life, he has a great attitude. He does not fall prey to Israel's denying God. He would get sober for 10 seconds and be like, yes, God has given me so much. And he acknowledges him every step of the way. He wrote a book, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was something about, the title is something about how grace, God, and salvation led me out of drugs, or something like that. I think you see interviews, he's very good at acknowledging that it was God that got him off the merry-go-round. And Israel was on that merry-go-round too. They would spin around and around. As you're going through those 9 chapters in that list, God says, you say you love me, but it's a mist. It's gone by the morning. And so they'd get on the merry-go-round of being or they'd be spinning that. I'm in love with God. Oh, I'm not. I'm in love with God. Nope, I'm not. And they just kept going around. And which makes it kind of a hard passage to preach on. So like, where do I start? Am I getting on the merry-go-round? Because it's so circular. It's not like a linear thought pattern. But we know that on the discipline thing, it's out of love that God is disciplined. So he has this anguish in his heart. And 11:8 shows this. I love this picture of his heart. Oh, this is where it's not depressing anymore. Okay. So this is where you see God's heart. And he proves here that it's not out of anger that he's disciplining anybody. It's out of love and anguish. Just as Hosea anguished over his lost wife, God anguishes over lost children that he loves that are damaging themselves. So how can I give up on you, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over? How can I treat you like Admah or Zeboim? I don't know. We'll go with Zeboim. My heart is changed within me. All my compassion is aroused. So, how can I give up on you? All my compassion is aroused. God is anguishing over the lost, and he's like, come back to me. I'm trying to protect you. And all along, that's been what he's saying. The kids, when they were given those horrible, horrible names, were also given a promise that someday God would change that name. When he said, hey, your name's Jezreel, he's like, someday when you come back to me, I'm going to change your name to great is this day. And punished, not loved, someday whenever you turn back to me, I'm going to change your name to shown love, to the loved one. And the disowned one, whenever you come back to me, I'm going to call you my people. And God's just, it's like, as soon as you turn around and come to me, it's going to be better. I know, sometimes he's calling out to you softly. Sometimes he's calling out really, really vibrantly, really loud. So, Hosea, like I think I read, where he went out, therefore I'm now going to allure her, speak tenderly to her. But then also, when God comes in, he's like, I'm going to roar. You're going to know it's me, and you're going to come running. Because there's no mistaking it. When he roars, his children will come trembling from the west. I was picturing, Carrie actually tipped me off that scene in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where Aslan roars, and it's that big MGM lion roar, and everybody's just like, whoa, okay, he's in control. He's got it covered. And it just resets everything else into perspective. And then there's that invitation to come back in. Hosea ends with God in this promise to his people saying, welcome back. When you get back to me, I'm going to say, I am like a flourishing juniper. Your fruitfulness comes from me. Who is wise? Let him realize these things. So when Israel or whoever comes back, they're going to realize that God provides that fruitfulness, as you just said. All the good things that we accomplish, we need to say, hey, thanks God for letting me accomplish this. So, So that's the end of Hosea. And I think all week long as I've been reading this one image keeps coming to my mind of a kid out past curfew. I mean, there's this danger, and God's seemingly kind of mad, and he's listing off like all these rules they've broken. But in the end, he's like, oh, I'm so glad you're home. And I'm picturing, I grew up in a split level house, so I'm picturing the top of the stairs, like a parent waiting. And the kid's out past curfew. And then whichever parent it is pacing back and forth. I told them they're going to get so much trouble, they're going to be grounded, whatever. I'm going to take away their phone, they're going to be grounded for life, no TV, whatever, no vegetable. Oh, of course you get vegetables. And they're going to be so mad. And they're going to go through all this fear and worry. It's kind of the motivation of this parent going back and forth like, oh, where are they? They should be home. And then the kid comes through the door. And the parent sees the child there. It's like, oh, you're safe and you're home. And the shoulders drop and they take a big sigh. And it's like, I'm so glad you're home. Like, all that fear that something's going wrong has disappeared. And so glad that you're home. And that's the theme of Hosea, is that God is anxiously waiting for you to come back home, for you to be safe, for you to be running towards him, not away from him. And the takeaway for us, if it's a metaphor between Hosea and Gomer, God and Israel, God and us, if we're Israel and Gomer, the metaphor is that you've never gone too far. You can chase everything else in the world, but God's still anxious for you to come back. And you've never run too far to come back. But if you take the other side of the metaphor and you're Gomer or you're God, well, maybe you shouldn't be God. But if you're the other side of the metaphor, if you're a Hosea, we should always be ready. There's no one we know that has run too far away. And we should always be ready for anybody who decides to turn around. We've got to be ready to welcome them home as well. So it's a story of that unearned love that you can't run away from. Israel, no matter how far they went, could not get away from God or get to a point where he wasn't eagerly expecting them to come back. That was still his foremost desire. And no matter how far you've run away or wherever you're at, if you've been off the merry-go-round for 10 seconds or 30 years, God's anxiously waiting for you to come back to him. And every person you know in the world, wherever they're running, we should be anxiously expecting them to come back as well. So, that's it.